What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the Cricket Ovation 2 and the Cricket Debut. So let's get into it. Now, the Cricket Ovation 2 has a 6.82-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 263, and an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9. We got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. Overall, I do like the look of this phone. It has decently thin bezels, and while it doesn't look very high-end, the materials do feel really solid, and it doesn't feel cheap at all. Now, the Cricket Debut has a 5.5-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 255, and an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9. As far as the materials and overall feel of the phone goes, this phone definitely feels really cheap. It's an extremely entry-level phone, so that is to be expected. And we also have these notches on the bottom and on the top that are really old-fashioned looking. Now, the front-facing camera, as you can see right here, is on the actual bezel, and this camera is 5 megapixels. Overall, in every way, I would say the Cricket Ovation 2 has a huge advantage over the Cricket Debut when it comes to the display. The resolution and quality might be the same, but with the Cricket Ovation 2, we're getting a much larger display in general and a taller form factor, so you won't have to scroll as much when you're reading stuff, and when you're watching videos in landscape mode, it's gonna look nicer and more cinematic. Now, both of these phones have 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so they're equal there, but that really isn't a lot of storage. If you're only using your phone for basic activities, which is really what phones in this price range are meant for, you should be okay as long as you watch what you're putting on your phone. But if you're more of a power user, if you're gonna have lots of apps, one advantage the Cricket Debut has though, is that it has the Android 11 Go edition, whereas the Cricket Ovation 2 just has the regular version. And the Android 11 Go edition takes up less storage, so technically you'll probably have a little bit more space on the Cricket Debut because of this than you'll have with the Cricket Ovation 2. Neither of these phones have wireless charging, which is not a surprise, but with the Cricket Ovation 2, we're getting a fingerprint scanner right here on the back. Unfortunately, no face unlock, but on the other hand, the Cricket Debut has neither a face unlock nor a fingerprint scanner, so at least with the Cricket Ovation 2, we are getting a fingerprint scanner. We're gonna go ahead and give it a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go. As you can see, the fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive, so no issues here. Overall, I do think it's really nice that the Cricket Ovation 2 does have a fingerprint scanner, because as you can see with the Cricket Debut, lots of really entry-level phones like this don't have one. Now, taking a look at the rear camera setups, with the Cricket Ovation 2, we got a 13 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera for portrait mode. The Cricket Debut, on the other hand, only has a single camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. So as you can see, overall, the Cricket Ovation 2 has many more camera features than the Cricket Debut. Now, does that mean that you're going to be able to take really professional pictures with the Ovation 2? No, not really. If you're taking lots of photos all the time that you're going to want to keep for social media or maybe something else, then I wouldn't recommend either of these phones because neither of them has a particularly nice camera setup. But at the same time, I can appreciate the fact that the Ovation 2 does have an ultra-wide camera. And in addition to that, while both of these phones technically have portrait mode, it only works with the Cricket Ovation 2 because this phone actually has a depth sensor. Now, these photos were both taken with the main cameras of each phone, or in the case of the Cricket Debut, the only camera. And honestly, for entry-level phones like these phones, they're not bad pictures. They're not particularly sharp, and the colors aren't the greatest, but at the same time, they're still acceptable. If you just want to take a few photos here and there to send to friends and family, or if you're using something like Snapchat where the quality doesn't matter, these phones are both going to work out just fine. But if you want to take pictures that you're actually going to keep for social media or something more professional, I would suggest looking at a different phone with a better camera. Now, I'm not going to show photos from the ultra-wide camera in portrait mode, since the Cricket Ovation 2 is the only one of these two that actually has those features. But I would say if you want a slightly better camera, I would go with the Cricket Ovation 2 over the Cricket Debut. But at the end of the day, if the camera is really that important to you, I would look at a different phone altogether. Internally, the Cricket Ovation 2 is getting 3 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A22 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 149 and a multi-core score of 453. So it's not very powerful. Really, this phone's only going to be good for basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web, and maybe some light social media use. And of course, streaming videos, it should be fine for that. But anything else is probably going to be a little too much for this phone to handle. With the Cricket debut, we're getting 2GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A20 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone as well, and it came back with a single core score of 130 and a multi-core score of 466. So I was actually surprised to see that the Cricket debut technically has a stronger processor than the Cricket Ovation 2, but honestly these numbers are so close that it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is neither of these phones are very fast, and for anything other than basic activities, you should probably look at a different device. But that being said, since these phones are so close in processing power, I wouldn't use this as a deciding factor between the two. Now we got a bit of a difference here with battery. The Cricket Ovation 2 has a 3900 mAh battery, and the Cricket debut has a 2500 mAh battery. Now on one hand, 3900 mAh is not very big, but it's at least an acceptable size. Whereas with the Cricket debut, this one is smaller than the iPhone 12, which I didn't even think was possible. So the Cricket debut is really not gonna have very good battery life. And in addition to that, it's not only gonna be weak throughout the day, but down the road, once the battery starts to wear out, you'll have to replace it much sooner than you will with the Cricket Ovation 2. Now, if battery is a super high priority for you, like with the camera, I wouldn't look at either of these phones because both of these phones have relatively small batteries in comparison to what you could get. But that being said, the Cricket Ovation 2 does have a clear advantage over the Cricket debut as far as battery goes. So in conclusion, which of these devices is better? I would say in pretty much every way, the Cricket Ovation 2 is the better device. It has a much larger display as you can see here, which is going to be better for content consumption. So if you're streaming videos, reading, viewing photos, stuff like that, the taller form factor and larger display overall you get with the Cricket Ovation 2 is going to be much better than this tiny display you get with the Cricket debut. In addition to that, this phone actually has a fingerprint scanner, a slightly better camera, and a significantly larger battery. These phones are the same in a lot of ways. They have the same amount of storage. The processing power is basically the same. Neither of them have very many features like wireless charging, NFC, even security options like Face Unlock. But at the same time, in every way there's a difference. The Cricket Ovation 2 is just better. Again, I was actually pretty surprised that the Cricket debut actually has a lot of specs in common with the Cricket Ovation 2, and I honestly think that if you're just using your phone for basic activities and literally nothing else, the Cricket debut still isn't really a bad choice, because if you're not going to be using your phone much, you might as well get the most inexpensive thing possible. But if you want a larger display and slightly better features, then the Cricket Ovation 2 is going to be the way to go. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next video.